Human Trafficking in Southwest Missouri by Amy Harkey. First, I wanted to take a moment and just define what human trafficking actually is. The United States Department of Justice defines human trafficking as sex trafficking in which commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform such act has not attained the age 18 years, or the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion, or for the purpose of subjection in involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. So we get what human trafficking and sexual exploitation is. We understand that it's a problem in other countries, especially third world countries. But do we really think that it happens here? An article that appeared in the 417 magazine in January of this year actually points out the targeted hotspots here in Missouri, and they're really close to home. Springfield, Joplin, and the I-44 corridor were three hotspots for human trafficking. The National Human Trafficking Hotline received 426 hotline phone calls from the state of Missouri. Of those calls, 18.5% were potential labor trafficking, 70.4% were potential sex trafficking, and then 38.5% of those phone calls were suspected sex trafficking minors who were under the age of 18. Missouri had the 17th highest call volume to the hotline of the states. So then we need to look at who's at risk. Klatt found factors that indicate teens that are more likely to become victims of sexual exploitation in his research, rationalizing predictors of child sexual exploitation and sex trading. Running away from home was a variable that increased the chances of being sexually exploited. Other factors that were the top four factors were included poverty, drug and alcohol use, having friends or family members involved in prostitution. And those are the four significant predictors of sexual exploitation. But there were many other factors that he also looked at that were associated with the sexual exploitation. Some of those include child abuse and neglect, family dysfunction, educational difficulties, homelessness, delinquency, and sexual activity. And as you listen to those factors that are associated with sexual exploitation, you may not be surprised when hearing them. In our text, Crossan and Tower mentions that children who are left alone, who are unsupervised, or who do not have the physical presence of numerous friends and neighbors are more likely to be abused. So when we look at poverty rates and the number of children who live in poverty in Southwest Missouri with single families, we can start to understand why human trafficking has become a problem. Southwest Missouri, especially Berry County, has a higher percentage of children who live below the poverty rate than the state average. The largest demographic of those living in poverty are aged 25 to 34. According to iempathize.org, which is a non-for-profit organization focusing on education and prevention of human trafficking, they've identified 5 types of people who are looking to exploit someone. First, they identified the pretender. Pretender is someone who pretends to be something that they aren't, like a boyfriend, a big sister, a father figure. Next, we look at the promiser. Someone who promises great things, an amazing job, travel, living in luxury. We can see why those two might really be a factor that children who have ran away from home, or maybe who live in an abusive or a neglected family, would really cling to those two types of people. Next, we see the protector. This is someone who uses physical power or intimidates to protect and control an individual. Next is the provider, someone who offers to take care of an individual's needs, clothes, food, a place to live. This would also identify with those who are living in poverty because they're promised a better life. Finally, we see the punisher. Punisher is someone who uses violence or threats to control the individual. And a lot of times, the punisher does not start out like this. They start out as the pretender or the promiser. And whenever those items that they have offered don't work, they move on to the role of punisher. So, what are the consequences of human trafficking? Children's physical, psychological, and social emotional development are all affected. Depending on the age of the child and developmental level, depends on exactly what area is affected. These effects can be devastating, long-lasting, and possibly irreparable. Countryman Rosworn in 2014 found that teaching healthy relationships, valuing individuals, and increasing self-esteem is a way to decrease the risk of an individual being sexually exploited. There are lots of non-for-profit organizations that focus on education, preventing, and also rehabilitation for those who have been involved in human trafficking. Through organizations such as the Polaris Project, individuals are educated in what to look for, warning signs, and who is at risk for human exploitation. But what else can we do? Rafferty points out that combating demand is one way that we can eradicate human exploitation. The unrelenting demand for cheap labor provided by women, girls, and boys who are being prostituted has been identified as the primary pull factor associated with demand for cheap labor and the growth of the commercial sex industry. The Rutgers Foundation also published an article that identified some of the markets that tend to raise the demand for sex trafficking. Those typically are in cities that host large events, such as the Super Bowl, Las Vegas Consumer Electronics Show, and then cities who have big Memorial Day turnouts. But the article goes on to caution that we need to not only look at those times of the year as being potential sex trafficking times, but to also look at it's a 365-day a year problem. So how can you make a difference? First of all, educate yourself. Educate yourself on what human trafficking is, the warning signs to look for, the people who are most likely to be involved in this. Next, educate your family, friends, and coworkers. Tell them what's going on. Visit these websites, donate to their organizations, help them be able to spread education throughout the teens and youth of our generation. Be aware of your community and your surroundings. Know when something seems off. Follow your gut. The worst thing that you could do is nothing.